Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the show. So happy to have you guys back here. We are in the month of February, the month of Valentine's Day, and the month of love, also Black History Month. And I'm excited to be back and chatting with you guys about everything that's going on. And speaking of love, I thought I would cover a very important topic that occurs a lot in not just in narcissistic abuse or abusive relationships, but also in a lot of relationships where we have unrealistic expectations also, where we kind of set ourselves up. And that the idea that I want, or the concept that I want to discuss today is idealization in romantic relationships. And what is idealization in romantic relationships? Idealization is a defense mechanism. It's a process whereby we are putting our partner or our potential love interest up on a pedestal. We only allow ourselves to see the good aspects of that person, or we're exaggerating positive attributes about that person. It is truly fantasy-based thinking at its finest, and we're refusing to think that our partner or love interest is anything less than perfect. We don't want to hear or believe that there's any sort of critical information or criticisms about them, and we're only choosing to look at the positive. And a lot of times when we idealize, we are very focused on an outcome. And what that means is I see it all the time. I hear about it all the time in the work that I do, where you have people that may be focused on getting rich quickly and doubling their income, right? And these people may fall susceptible to cons. People that want to, they hit a certain age bracket, or they hit a certain time in their life, and they're suddenly in a rush to get married, to have a child, or be in a relationship. And they are so in a rush to do that. It doesn't matter who they end up selecting. Whoever they end up selecting, they're going to make it work because they're so focused on having that outcome and being in that next phase of life, that we forget to take a step back and look at a person's character, or look at what they're showing us as to whether or not they're actually able to help us with achieving our desired goals, or they actually have mutual values, or have even the same goals, right? And what that looks like for them, and evidence that they are able to put those things into practice. So, so that's kind of the gist of what idealization is. And I want to talk about a little bit about where it comes from. For most people who do it, and there are quite a few of us that do it, there's some of us that are more extreme than others. And I'd like to give a real world example of, someone who idealizes. And I don't know if you watch TV or not. I don't typically watch it, even though I have one sitting behind me. I don't typically watch it, but there was a time, or there occasionally, I may, when I'm trying to like really disconnect from all the work and stuff that I'm doing, I may look at a Real Housewife episode. And I like the girls in Atlanta. I like the girls in New York, New Jersey, Beverly Hills. But I'll use one example of idealization that I remember very clearly back when I was looking at the Real Housewives of Atlanta. There's a lady on the show by the name of Portia, and she's kind of um, she's not one of my favorite characters, um, nonetheless, to say that there was a time on the show where she had a potential love interest, Dennis, in which I believe they go on to have a child together. But I remember before they even had a child together, she had these series of men that she was dating and that she expressed very early on that she wanted to have a child. It would seem to be more of an act of desperation. I remember one of the men that she got with prior to Dennis, she stated explicitly that she wanted to have a child and that was her goal, and that she wanted him to sign a baby nuptial agreement. And the baby nuptial agreement was, basically kind of really stripping his rights as a father and giving her total control over the baby. Fast forward to when she got to Dennis. Again, she's still very hyper focused on the goal of, having a family, being in a relationship. There was a lot of controversy that came out around Dennis, around his alleged behavior. And I remember some of the other girls on the show who she said were friends or foe had brought up numerous concerns about his character and about things that they heard or things that they felt that they knew. And, of course, they tried to tell her, like, stop. He's a red flag. He's got X, Y, and Z going on. Or, my friend was with him and all this kind of stuff. And she was not trying to hear it. In fact, it became a point of tension between her and one of her other castmates, in particular, Candy, that, was very clear about what she knew. And so she became very resentful and very hostile towards her because of that. And then fast forward, there was, Candy had broached, he's got all these women's names tattooed all over him, and he has a history of doing all this other stuff, and, really just trying to open her eyes to see and ask questions. And I remember very vividly when she was on the date with Dennis, she was saying how, she was telling him about, some of the concerns that women were bringing to her and how they were suggesting that she should ask questions. And she's told him that, on TV that she was not going to do that because women who were asking too many questions about the past and about other concerns were probably sitting somewhere single, and she wasn't interested in doing that. And so, she made it very clear that she was interested in getting engaged and having a child, and she was not interested in questioning things or really sort of fleshing out any sort of concerns. And in fact, there were some concerns that came up where there were, I believe, from what I recall, like some inappropriate text messages and things like that that he had received from other women that they had gotten into an argument over. And, although she may have gotten initially upset, again, she blew through that and got back into the relationship rather quickly. So that is one example of where you have someone that, very hyper focused on the goal, very, just is like, I'm not going to question what he's doing. I'm not going to question any concerns that other people may have. I'm not going to even entertain the idea that something else could be amiss or that we're out of alignment. I'm going to forge ahead because I'm focused on getting what I want, and I don't care if evidence points to the contrary. And so that's kind of an example. And, I bring her up not to say that either one of them are bad people, or for lack of a better word, what I'm saying is there are times when we tend to focus on that, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean a person is narcissistic. It doesn't mean that you're experiencing narcissistic abuse, but it is something, or any abuse of any kind of sort, rather. But it just points to show that we can do this because we're so focused on achieving a certain outcome. And where does this come from? I believe anytime we have a defense mechanism, which I do believe that idealization is a defense mechanism, it is one that is oftentimes rooted in childhood, and it's a survival mechanism. With our parents or through our childhood wounds, we have basic needs that are unmet, and there could be trauma in the home, there can be abuse in the home, or we could just have basic unmet needs. Those unmet needs might be that our parents are emotionally unavailable to us. The needs might be that we feel or ourselves, we perceive maybe siblings or other factors may be more important to our parents than we are. And so therefore we're not getting a need met. And or we may just be trying to survive our home. Our home may be a chaotic environment or an environment which is very unstable, and we're just trying to survive. We're trying to make sense of it. And part of how we make sense of chaos, how we make sense of dysfunction, or how we deal with chaos, dysfunction, or even abuse is very seldom do we blame the other person. Very seldom do we look at it as abusive. Very seldom do we look at it as other people having the issue. Instead, what we do mentally is we try to overcompensate and we internalize, and we say, I'm not good enough, or there's something wrong with me, or there's some imperfection, or I somehow made this person do this somehow. So let me change myself. Let me change what I'm doing. Let me change how I'm thinking to make up for what's lacking in my relationship. So we definitely try to overcompensate mentally, and we go through this mental workout to try to fill in the gaps. We try to make it work. We um, we change the narrative because we believe it's all in our perspective, or that it's something that is a result of our doing, instead of actually looking at the factual information and saying, this person is this way, and maybe they're not available for that, or they're dysfunctional, or there's some other stuff going on, and that has nothing to do with me. And as children, of course, that can be very difficult and complex to understand unless you're getting counseling or some sort of interventions, very similar to counseling at a very early age. But if you're not, or even if you are, sometimes those kind of things can get missed, especially with children, because it can show up as like, oh, my child is having problems in school, or my child is having problems just in general. Fix my child is usually how that kind of shows up in therapy. And that could show up as like inattentiveness, difficulty to concentrate, or, there could be a whole host of other problems that are presenting themselves, which makes it more difficult to see, what's actually going on underneath the surface. So that's why those things can get overlooked. And that's why we idealize our partners. And, idealization is definitely black or white thinking. It's all or nothing, being invested in everything or being invested in nothing. And so the opposite end of idealization is devaluation. And so I may jump into devaluation next week, so I won't get into that too much here. But there's certain aspects of when we idealize someone, we're putting all of our eggs in one basket. First of all, we're also looking to that other person to completely validate us, validate our experiences, and be who we need them to be. They are the one piece of hope that we hang our hat on. And part of our hopefulness in terms of hanging our hat on that person, is, wanting to look at their potential. This is their potential to live up to my expectation of accomplishing a goal, an end goal. This is my expectation that this person is going to continue to pour into me, and therefore that's going to validate that I'm lovable, that I'm good enough, and that our love is perfect. And so what we're actually looking for is we're actually looking to rewrite the narrative of our childhood history. We're looking to rewrite the narrative of that unmet need or that core wound that occurred very early on. And we're looking to rewrite that narrative through the guise of someone else, as opposed to doing the work to really closely pull out and look at that narrative and do our own reparative work. So we're looking, essentially what we're looking for is we're looking to, you know, engage in a relationship that's very similar and show that it has a different outcome, no matter if that person is exactly like, someone who harmed us or someone who's completely incapable of fulfilling our needs. We're looking to invest ourselves wholeheartedly in that and do the mental work, do the mental hula hoops to say, look, aha, see, I was able to change someone, or I was able to change that narrative, and I was actually able to get what I wanted despite the limitations that I've had to overcome. In this person, I said that this person was perfect enough times. I believe that this person was perfect, and I spoke it and I worked it somehow into my existence. I did all this work and look at what I have. And so there's so much work putting into potential or being put into that other person that we're neglecting our own needs, right? We are neglecting making sure that that person can actually give us what we want in more ways than one. We're also thinking about, we're putting our goals on a pedestal in addition to that person. We're not rationally thinking about things in looking for evidence to see that not just them, but that we too can also do what we need to do in order to get our needs met. So that's the other thing, is we're shortcutting and we are looking for quick fix solutions. And you see people that kind of dive head in head first into relationships without doing any sort of work. And so that's what idealization is we're hanging our hat on that potential. We're looking at all the positive things. We're skipping over the red flags. We're not really clarifying whether or not this person can meet our needs, or whether this person's character or values are in alignment with ours. And we also too present ourselves as perfect. So just like we are avoiding looking at the flaws in our potential partner, or love interest, or friend, we also try to hide our flaws, right? And I think hiding flaws or presenting ourselves as our best foot forward happens a lot, especially in dating relationships in general. But again, this is something that, when you're idealizing, you really, really try not to be a problem. You try not to present any sort of problems or concerns or issues that you may have in the relationship, and you kind of go along to get along, and everything's fine, everything's wonderful. You're telling everybody else around you everything's fine, everything's wonderful. You're telling yourself, although you may have had a little inkling of a concern in the back of your mind, I'm just gonna, we're just gonna go past that. I'm gonna focus on the positive, and we can overcome this challenges, and I don't really want to focus on that. And you may have people that may bite your head off, right? When you try to point out something to the contrary, because again, they're focused on doing this mental work. And while they may have had this like little ping of doubt or ping of suspicion, they don't want you to like mess up what they've got going on, right? So no one's ready for that typically, right? Or that can be very upsetting. It can be very detrimental to that, right? When outside people, whether your friend or loved one or whatever, and you're trying to point out evidence to the contrary, if you're trying to point out and say, hey, everything is not what it seems, if you're focused on a facade, that's not something you want to hear. Okay. So how do we fix idealization? How do we stop doing that? Um, I kind of spoke about it a little bit already, but I think the one thing to do, I'm always going to be a proponent of therapy and advocate for that. I definitely think that's something that would be helpful in terms of going to therapy, talking to a therapist, being real with your therapist, and examining your stuff, particularly your childhood, or your unmet needs. And I think that's something that you should be doing, regardless if idealization is happening or not. I think it's always a good idea to kind of look at what your unmet needs are and how that impacts how you're moving through the world, how you're viewing others, how you're viewing situations or relationships, and what your behavior is as an outcome of that. So first of all, going to see a therapist, looking at your stuff, working on your stuff, right? So allowing the shield of denial to come down and allowing yourself to be very vulnerable, open, honest, and transparent, and working on that stuff and healing those wounds, with a trained professional that can help you with that. I think also too, it's a good thing to acknowledge that you have goals. It's good to acknowledge that you want to be married, you want to have friendships, you want to have a family, you want to do that. And I think those are very healthy um, goals for any person to have. But I want you to take a step back and break down those goals into micro goals, like what it takes for you to get there, and also what type of person those goals would help you with attaining those goals. So, and just not to say that you need a person to help you with your goals, but if you're thinking about, hey, I'm going to get married, right? That could be one potential goal. Okay, what type of person do you want to be married to? Right. And so it's a good idea to think about the types of qualities, and perhaps write those down, of the type of person that you need to be married to in order that to be happily married, right? And be doing an evaluation if you're dating, right? And this is something that you want. It's a good idea to kind of look at what you've gotten written down there in black and white about what you want versus what you actually have, which leads me to the next point is you want to look at the actual facts, right? So you have your wants and your needs over here, and looking at that, talking about that with your therapist and making sure that those things are realistic, and looking at the factual information, whether or not this person is in alignment with you, whether or not their actions are in alignment with you, and are they showing you, is their character showing you that, that they're very interested in what you're interested in, and both of you are invested in the same goals there, right? And so taking a look at that. Also, I spoke about putting all of your eggs in one basket, meaning that you're heavily invested in one person, right? And there's a lot of people that do this right from the very beginning, like dating and, all this kind of stuff, or friendships, even in that, we might be isolative most of the time. But then if we put ourselves out there and we meet a friend or we meet a potential love interest, what we'll do, because we spent so much time in isolation or we have reservations about being around people, right, is we'll just be hyper focused on one person. We'll spend all of our time, all of our energy in one person, right? And so I suggest, spreading yourself around and having a good mix of people to select from, a good mix of people that you are dating, right? Before you get into a committed relationship, because that's the other thing too. Dating is not the same as a committed relationship. Dating is a screening process to see, to connect with others and to see if the persons or persons that you're connecting with are worthy of being in a committed relationship. So maybe even fleshing out and understanding practices around what you're doing. The other thing that I will say, and lastly, what I'll say is I don't want to give away too much, but distancing yourself from the goal. Right. So you have your goals, you write it down and thinking about, this is ultimately what I want in my life. Distancing your goal and making that one aspect of your life, not necessarily where you are so laser focused on it, that's all you can see, and that it becomes an act of desperation to try to maintain or get to that goal. Goals that you try to achieve out of desperation usually typically don't work. If you're making fast decisions, you're making desperate decisions or last resort decisions, very seldom do those work out well. And you want to give yourself time and space to actually work towards that. And so part of working towards that is screening, taking your time and connecting with people and doing it that way. So I hope that that makes sense. Love to know what your thoughts are on this show. Make sure you leave a comment down below if it's on social media or YouTube. If you like what you hear and it resonates with you, do me a favor and leave a positive review on the podcast on iTunes. That will be great. Share this episode with a friend or someone else that you think could really benefit from this. And as always, if you're ready to take a deeper dive, click down below because I do have individual and group membership coaching becoming available. And you can click that link down below and be the first to know so that we can get started and take a deeper dive, work through this stuff, get you some support around, really just sort of challenging these beliefs, undoing these narratives, and get you on the way to healthier, more loving, more beneficial relationships in a healthier, more vibrant version of yourself, of course. And as always, if you have questions, a datewithdarkness@gmail.com. If you're interested in learning more about me and my services, drnataliejones.com. If you sign up for my email newsletter, which typically comes out every Friday, you can download my current ebook on my website about red flags in relationships and sign up for that newsletter. You guys have been great. I love talking to you. And until next time, you guys take care of yourselves and be well.